Hello and welcome back to the channel. As always, I'm your host, Morgan. This past week, we got to welcome in a brand new administration. We got Trump out of the White House, and I'm pretty happy about that. But there's something we need to talk about. So today we're going to talk about a thing that simultaneously calls for a better future for the planet and strikes fear straight into the hearts of those who tend to lean right politically, i.e. conservatives. If you haven't guessed it, today we're talking about the Green New Deal. Before we get into the summary of the Green New Deal and kind of what it is, which the legislation is linked down below so you can go read it yourself, I'd like to mention that currently it's most strongly associated with Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC. But while she is the one that is sponsoring the particular piece of legislation that will be up for votes in the House very shortly, she is not necessarily the one that thought of this. At least versions of the Green New Deal have been discussed by environmental groups and politicians since at least 2003. So that brings us to the summary of what the Green New Deal is. So the Green New Deal is a piece of legislation with goals of achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions, establishing millions of high-wage jobs and ensuring economic security for all, investing in infrastructure and industry, securing clean air and water, climate and community resiliency, healthy food, access to nature, and a sustainable environment for all, and promoting justice and equality. So all of these goals aren't necessarily just to do with these environmental initiatives. They also have to do with the economy and helping the United States get back on its feet after the massive pandemic that is still ravaging the globe, by the way, but also improving quality of life for everyone. So it has these environmental initiatives wrapped up with these social and economic policy initiatives as well. So basically, the Green New Deal says that it's going to get these goals done through a 10-year mobilization effort by building smart power grids, upgrading all existing buildings and constructing new buildings to achieve maximum water and energy efficiency, removing pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from the transport and agricultural sectors, cleaning up existing hazardous waste and abandoned sites, ensuring business persons are free from unfair competition, and providing higher education, higher quality healthcare, and affordable, safe, and adequate housing to all. So that's a lot of things that it wants to do in about 10 years. And that's going to bring us to the first problem I would like to address with this Green New Deal. Quick disclaimer, I'm very much in favor of the Green New Deal, but we do need to discuss problems before we can discuss why I support it and address claims about it from those on the opposition side. The first problem I would like to address can be seen in this quote from the NPR article that is also linked down below if you would like to read that. The quote is from Jesse Jenkins, a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School. So the quote itself says, "Where we need to be targeting really is a net zero carbon economy by about 2050, which itself is an enormous challenge and will require reductions in carbon emissions much faster than have been achieved historically. 2030 might be a little bit early to be targeting." So basically what it says is 2030 may be kind of unrealistic to actually achieve the goal of net zero carbon emissions, and 2050, so a 30-year goal, is going to be more realistic. And honestly, I agree with that. Achieving net zero is going to be very difficult. Now, because it's going to be difficult does not mean I think it's impossible. I think it's perfectly possible for society to move towards net zero. Net zero does not mean absolutely no carbon emissions. What net zero actually means is that all of the carbon emissions are going to be offset by something else. So net zero does not mean ending everything, no carbon emissions at all, because that's nonsensical. There are natural processes that emit carbon as well. It just means that we're going to be doing better for the environment, and all of our carbon emissions will be offset 1-to-1 by something else. And the reason why I agree that a more realistic goal may be 2050 for this particular thing is because if we did set the goal for net zero carbon emissions by 2030, at this point we are in the year 2021. That's 9 years. 2030 is literally right around the corner. So if we set this very ambitious goal and don't meet it, that's almost like proving the other side right. And because humans have a very short attention span, it is possible that the narrative will be flipped to it's not doing anything, it's impossible. Whereas if we set a longer goal, but actually meet the goal before the deadline, that's even better. So the 2030 goal for the carbon emission thing, I think, should be worded as heading towards net zero carbon emission, or at 50% of net zero carbon emissions, or something along that way. Now, I think that 50% may be kind of ambitious as well, but that's just a better possible wording or a more realistic goal to set by 2030, in my opinion. The other problem that we need to address here is that this piece of legislation is a non-binding resolution. And again, this quote also from that NPR article says, altogether, the Green New Deal is a loose framework. It does not lay out guidance on how to implement these policies. And that is also a bit of a problem, because things like non-binding resolutions, while they signal a desire by the government to do something, it doesn't necessarily hold them accountable to anything. It doesn't say they have to, it just says they want to. So basically, this is a loose framework that sets goals without answering the how do we do it question. But AOC does note that if it passes, they'll immediately get to work on bills that will make those goals happen. Now, that in and of itself is very vague, but it is reasonable to believe that the person who is sponsoring this particular bill is going to immediately get to work on making the goals and promises of that bill come about. And then the last little problem is that it's expensive. And yeah, it will be expensive, but so is pretty much anything. Change is expensive. So the logic, we're going to move on to what the logic of entwining these environmental issues and the social and economic issues is. And basically, the big one is that climate change affects everybody. It's already negatively impacting coastal communities. It's negatively impacting agriculture. It's negatively impacting health. And if you want more specific examples of those, please feel free to head on over to my climate change playlist, where I talk about some more specifics of how climate change is affecting different areas of human life. But again, we see these increase in wildfires. We see the hurricanes that negatively impact all those coastal communities. I don't think I've done a video on how climate change affects human health yet, but through these increased heat waves and temperature oscillations, it does negatively impact human health, especially those with like chronic respiratory conditions. And this climate change is being accelerated by anthropogenic causes beyond what nature can adapt to. And so really the only way to mitigate that is at the human level and at the society level. And so if we can simultaneously address these environmental and social and economic issues We're going to create jobs, which is going to, specifically by improving infrastructure and shifting towards that clean energy grid, which in and of itself is going to improve the social and economic things going on while improving the environmental things as well. So by intertwining the environmental with the other issues, it kind of emphasizes how society is still a part of the planet. We are still a part of the biosphere. And if we move society towards a greener society while taking care of each other, while taking care of the communities and the people, since government has a responsibility to take care of the population that they govern, we're going to get to a more environmentally friendly future, and also a future where people are actually taken care of. Now that we've kind of discussed the potential problems with the Green New Deal as it stands right now and the logic of intertwining those environmental, social, and economic issues. I know, hush, that's a good point, but hush. We're going to address some of the very common claims of the opposition, or those who are very much against this particular piece of legislation. The first claim is that by shifting away from fossil fuels, we're going to leave many people without jobs. And while we will lose the fossil fuel industry jobs, they're going to be replaced by new jobs in clean energy and the transportation sectors. And remember that the Green New Deal itself also calls for a bunch of other things like cleanup of abandoned sites and et cetera, et cetera. Those are also sectors where we're going to see more jobs as well. But the more permanent jobs that we'll see will be jobs in like solar, wind, and other sustainable energy industries. There's going to be plenty of jobs improving and maintaining infrastructure, jobs in the proposed high-speed railway and other forms of public transit, because a big part of this is also improving our public transit systems that are not only going to reduce the amount of driving that people have to do, but make it a more pleasant experience taking public transportation. I know I, for one, if I didn't have to drive everywhere, I probably wouldn't. If I had a convenient and safe form of public transportation, I would probably opt for that because it's more environmentally friendly, and let's face it, driving kind of sucks sometimes. So these are some of the goals that would actually make more jobs than you would lose from the fossil fuel industry. But this is probably one of the biggest claims I see, that we're losing our fossil fuel jobs and we need to be on our own energy grid and yada, 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 because we need energy independence. And while by shifting to green energy, we will have energy independence while making more jobs than we lose. So your kind of argument there doesn't make a whole lot of sense when it's dissected. Also, in this whole transportation thing, there is an emphasis on promoting electric vehicles and electric charging stations over the gas-powered vehicles. And the biggest thing to that is, oh, well, you still need electricity. Like, yeah, but in the proposal, the majority of electricity, if we hit the goal, will come from sustainable sources. So no, you're not just increasing your carbon footprint with your electricity use while reducing it via your gasoline use. So before you come with that one, that's why that rebuttal doesn't work. The next claim is that this will harm the agricultural industry. And this is one that I've seen be a little bit more frequent in discourse and in different articles I've read about the opposition to it. Because the Green New Deal does say it wants to reduce emissions from the agricultural industry. So the reason why this claim isn't that great is that no, it's not going to harm the agriculture industry. If you actually read the legislation past the summary, there's actually an emphasis on working with farmers to make agriculture more sustainable and actually maintain or improve the means of production with the technology available. And there's an emphasis on improving the sustainable agriculture and ensuring access to healthy food. So no, it's not going to destroy the agriculture industry. It's just going to make it greener. And I fail to see how that is a bad thing. The next claim, this will harm American industry. Again, no, it won't, because there's an emphasis in the Green New Deal, if you actually read the piece of proposed legislation, on reducing overseas production of goods. So there's a big emphasis on bringing production and jobs back home so that we're not exploiting and polluting environments overseas. And we're also boosting the economy here. So no, it's not going to harm American industry. It's going to actually improve it and give it a boost. The next claim, the Green New Deal is socialism or communism or an attack on capitalism. So while the Green New Deal does have social programs in it, it is in no way an attack on capitalism. In fact, it actually works within the structure of capitalism. So because it's going to promote those new jobs and has an emphasis on industry and all of that lovely stuff, it is not an attack on capitalism. Just because there is a thing in the Green New Deal calling for healthcare for all, a social program, doesn't mean that it's destroying capitalism. Also, if you're going to use socialism and communism in your argument, basically what you're doing is you're using fear-mongering buzzwords to scare those who don't actually know the definitions of socialism and communism. And I encourage you to please learn what socialism and communism really are if you're going to use them as an argument against something. And for the record, the two probably biggest names in our government that are often called socialist and communist are AOC and Bernie Sanders, and they are technically both neither of those things. So if you're going to regurgitate claims like that, please learn what the words you're using mean. The Green New Deal is not socialism. It's not communism. It's not an attack on capitalism. It's actually a very capitalist proposal that happens to have a few social programs. And by the way, Social Security and things like that are also social programs. So there you go. And the last claim that we're going to talk about was also in the problem section, is that it will be expensive. And yeah, that's true, but things worth doing tend to be expensive. And by the way, if you read the legislation, which again, it's not a long document, it's actually pretty easy to read, much of the funding could come from getting rid of tax breaks for the 1%. So the massively rich that pay $700 in taxes, and actually taxing them their fair share instead of letting them get away with tax breaks. That would pay for a lot of what the Green New Deal is calling for. And while it will be expensive, it will be better for society in the long run, making that expense justified. And it is very frustrating to me that if the expense is for something that's going to make life better for people and actually make the government take care of the citizens in the way that it should, because I feel like if I'm paying my taxes, my money should go towards bettering society, and the United States has not been so great at that. It's justified. So in the long run, while it will be expensive in the beginning to jumpstart everything, it's going to create more jobs. It's going to make life better. It's going to protect the environment, it's justified. And we are a species on this planet. We are members of the biosphere, of the greater global community dynamics, the greater global ecosystem dynamics. As the dominant sentient species, I think that we do have a responsibility to not just destroy this hunk of rock floating out in space and keep closing our ears and pretending that this kind of alarming trend we see with the climate is not in part our fault, just because there are natural climate oscillations. We have accelerated it, and that is an issue. And the Green New Deal is something that the United States needs so that we can address our part with climate change, protect the environment, and make our economy and social situation in the country and all of that stuff better. Make life better, not just for you and me, but for those less fortunate, and protect the world. Why is that such a scary thing for some people? Well, that's all I really have for you guys today. I do encourage you to check out the links I have down below that kind of go into some more detail than I did, because I didn't want this to drag on too long, but I do get the feeling this is going to be a rather long video. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, night, what have you. Please support the Green New Deal. It's not a bad thing, and I will see you all in the next one. Thank you again for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and ring that bell if you would like to see more. And if you'd like to follow me on any of my other social medias, the links are down in the description below. Don't forget to check out thereptilegoth.com for all of my articles and blog posts. If you found any value in this video and you would like to help support the channel, please check out my Patreon page. That link is also in the description down below. And a special thanks goes out to my Diamond Dragon patron, Diane B. What you're doing is really helping me fund a dream here. I will see you guys all in the next one.